every Russian is responsible for this war. How? I'll explain. Now, in the previous video, I talked about how really difficult it is to know what ordinary Russians are thinking. And it's not because I don't believe in the ability of polling or statistics. I believe it's very difficult to let people talk honestly about something that is very complicated when they feel threatened, legitimately so, by the regime they're living in. So maybe it seemed I was trying to be very kind in thinking that most Russians are still decent people and they eventually understand, and we can't know, and I'm deciding in favor of, given all the circumstances people are living in, of assuming that there's a shred of decency in every person still. That deep down, despite all the propaganda, if you would ask people in Russia what they are really thinking about what's going on, without any threat, they would probably know it's wrong. But this is not what I'm talking about now. When we talk about responsibility, first we need to clear the air what that means. There are two concepts: guilt, which is deeply personal, which is direct, and responsibility, which is a little bit more than just guilt. Are Germans who are living now guilty of the Holocaust? Of course not. Most of them weren't born then. And the few that are still alive, okay, they're responsible, but there's not that many anymore. Are we as Germans responsible still for the Holocaust? Well, we are living in a country that is the historical successor to Nazi Germany. Some of the successes of Germany post-war could very well still go back to Nazi Germany. And there is, of course, a cultural continuity, and there was much more political continuity in both East and West Germany than we probably would like to admit. But responsibility doesn't mean necessarily that you're guilty. Responsibility means that you, as a member of a certain country or culture, live your life in a way that takes on that history to make sure it doesn't ever repeat again. So Germans are responsible now for the Holocaust insofar as we carry that extra bit of responsibility to make sure something like this doesn't ever happen again in Germany and in the world. So it's a responsibility for the past, but it's even more so a responsibility for the future. Every citizen of any country, in a way, shares that burden and responsibility for past failures of their countries. So, whatever country you're living in, you have a responsibility that the dark chapters of their history will never repeat again. So as an American, your responsibility is to stand up against slavery, racism, colonialism. If you're from any other country that has ever colonized anybody in the past, colonization was more and is still more prevalent than we think, that gives you the responsibility to make sure that their is an extra bit of energy on your part spent to prevent that from happening again. That may seem unfair, but that's how it is. People not wrongly expect that. Now, this is historical or future responsibility. This is for something that happened in the past. But what about things that are happening now? If you live in a country, if you're a citizen of a country, you are, of course, in certain ways responsible also to execute your civic responsibility. You have to vote. I mean, you have a right to vote, but you should actually use it. Even if you don't vote, though, you're sending a signal. If things happen in your country that are wrong, you need to speak out against them. Now, we can debate on what's right or wrong from a political perspective. There are some things where morally maybe there's much more of a clearer picture. But if you're convinced that an injustice is happening, you have a responsibility to speak out. You also have a responsibility to inform yourself and make sure that you're on the right side. But it's probably better you speak out whether or not that's right or wrong. Just be honest. Be honest also if you erred. If you say, believe something now, and in the future you find out you were wrong, say that. You know? So just be honest and be engaged. That's what you have to do as a citizen. In a dictatorship, things are much more complicated because you will not have the power of an honest vote. Your ability to protest is severely limited. But dictatorships don't just happen with a snap of a finger. It's typically a process. It's creeping in. There are few exceptions. When Hitler got to power, he was very quick in solidifying his rule. Yeah? So sometimes it can happen very quickly, but even then, there were years where people kept voting for the political margins, either the communists or the Nazis or the German nationalists. And so there were ways of stopping Hitler by preventing his rise. That the prevention of the dictatorship or dictatorial structures to appear is the responsibility of every citizen. When I say every Russian is responsible for what is happening right now, is that those Russians who have voted for Putin, knowing full well what he has done, they carry that responsibility. For decades, Putin has manipulated the Russian political system, has taken rights away, has fabricated reasons for war with Chechnya, had stolen Crimea, stolen the Donbass, taking away parts of Georgia. And if Russians agree with that and voted for him in spite of him doing so, there's a responsibility for it. I'm not saying they're individually guilty for it, but they have to carry that responsibility. If what you did as a citizen, within the small sphere of influence you had, did not contribute to limiting the rise of Putin, then there's a responsibility. If you are against the war, now, well, your choices are limited, but you may have had the possibility to speak out earlier, or at least to leave. Plenty of Russians have left They did the right thing because they voted with their feet, and they made sure they would never kill a single Ukrainian. It's a tough thing to consider. Should I leave my country? Should I stay? Those who left made the moral choice. Those who stayed may have also made a choice they couldn't change. So when I say they are all responsible, what does this mean? Doesn't mean that you should now go into the street and get mass arrested or mass killed. I'm not saying that. It means that any moment where change is possible, take it. Any crack in the system that opens, use it. Any chance to get rid of the criminals running Russia, use it. And we saw that that is possible when Prigozhin led his ragtag band of Wagner mercenaries and criminals to Moscow and then got cold feet somehow. Now, Prigozhin also, bad guy. But many people were willing to stand up for Prigozhin against Putin. So hopefully the next guy who does that will not be a Prigozhin. But the responsibility right now is to make sure you're prepared for the moment that the system crumbles, and then make sure this never happens again. Make sure you work towards a democratic system with rule of law, with checks and balances, separation of powers, a peaceful country where the idea of a democratic Ukraine does not scare your leaders, because that was Putin's fear. A democratic Ukraine, a country that Russians think of as their brother country, this kind of offshoot Russia. That's probably the thinking. But that is the scary thing for someone like Putin. If Ukrainians, who are so close culturally to Russia, or used to be, well, maybe changing even more, if they can have a democracy, if they can fight against oligarchs, if they can fight against corruption, then why can't we? If Ukrainians can live in a normal country without fear, why can't we, Russians? And that's the threat that Putin saw. That's the reason for the war. That's also the reason for the quasi-annexation of Belarus, because don't forget, Belarus is a victim here too. So every Russian being responsible means every Russian carries the burden of being associated with what is happening now. Every Russian carries the hope of making sure that the future is better. That's what I mean. So in the sense, responsibility carries this future trajectory, this hope. Things can be better. Let's work for it. There are brave people in Russia, outside of Russia, who are interested in a better future. And we have to have that. No one can have any interest in Russia failing as a country. So even though the opening may have sounded a little bit harsh, I am still optimistic because I have to be. It's not because I'm naive. It's because the only thing that ever really works is hope and hopefulness. Well, not being necessarily Pollyannish, but hopefulness helps. So let's be hopeful and let's work towards that hope. Slava Ukraini, and let's hope for the best. Thank you, everyone. This is Erratic Attempts. I'm Dr. Philip Kneis, and see you soon.